on, so we may have people coming in and out, but I'll direct your attention first to the committee substitute on Senate Bill 2022. This is our Miller fix that we've talked about the first couple of meetings, and the committee substitute does have a reverse repealer in it. So make sure that that's the right one. Is that it, Ethan? Okay. All right, so any questions about this committee substitute with a reverse repealer on it? Again, this is dealing with sentencing of juvenile offenders who've, taken a life. Questions? If not, for motion. Motion is title sufficient to pass. Committee substitute. All in favor say aye. Any opposed, nay? The ayes have it. Thank you. That will be reported to the floor. And we have had conversations with our counterparts, our friends in the House. I believe that they are also, Chairman Horan is talking about filing the same bill with a reverse repealer, because there is a lot of discussion that I've had with some of you individually and that we've had in the committee about juries versus judges and who's making those final decisions on the sentencing. So I think that's still very much in discussion. So that's why we have the reverse repealer on there, and we want to keep that discussion going. We just don't want to get captured on a deadline day. So, all right. Next, we have one of our assistant DAs from Forest and Perry counties, District Attorney Becky Denham. Becky's here. Becky, if you will stand now. The tricky thing about being able to see and hear on the newfangled video stuff is that you have to speak into a microphone, or else our friends watching online can't hear, apparently. So, yes. Yeah, and you're welcome to have a seat at the end of one of these tables if you'd like to, just so you don't have to stand up. But Becky contacted me during the out of session and some local citizens about a situation, and maybe it has a name now. I'm so old, nowadays. I'm not sure all these different names and how things are called and whatnot. So you may can educate us on this phenomena, and if there's some, new phraseology for what it is, but essentially where middle-aged, mainly guys, I'm guessing, but I guess it could work both ways, sort of target 16 and 17-year-old minors for sex. And because of our age of consent statutes, once the authorities get involved and the parents try to get involved to try to punish these people, there's no way of actually going about accomplishing that, because we don't allow for that. It's considered a consensual act at that point. That may be a big oversimplification, but I asked Ms. Denham if she would come up and kind of give us some examples of, is this a problem, how it's happening, what, if anything, we can do to try to abate that. Ms. Denham, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me. We have had issues with this, and I think it's mainly due to an increase of communication through technology. We've seen before in the past where we have a position of authority or trust where we will criminalize sexual behavior with a 16 and 17-year-old minor child if the perpetrator is in a position of authority or trust. What we're seeing now is it's someone they're meeting online, someone out of state, someone who's driving into Mississippi, having sexual activity with this minor. It might be a parent's friend. It's not going to be a teacher, preacher, therapist, law enforcement officer, or legislator, God forbid, right? You would all be positions of authority or trust. We all would. However, we're seeing people that have no real connection established with the child, and they're communicating online and oftentimes lying about their age. I have one young woman. She is now of age. I've asked her permission to use her story. I will keep her name private. And she was 16 at the time, and he lied and said he was 19. Ends up being a 31-year-old male. And of course, that was devastating for her to find out, because she thought she was in a relationship with someone close to her age. Turns out it was a predator, someone who preyed on her, and there was no way for our office to be able to prosecute that crime. Interesting, though, you look at child exploitation, the age is under 18, not married, not serving in the military. You look at felony child abuse, child neglect, under 18, not serving in the military, not married. Then you look at the sex crimes that we have with statutory rape, sexual battery, lustful touching. The only time it goes above the age of 16 is if the perp is in a position of authority or trust. Our office believes in Forest and Perry counties that we care about all children, not just based on the perpetrator's profession. We want to protect all kids. I had the benefit of prosecuting in Florida where I had this law, unlawful sexual activity with a minor. It did give a punishment for anyone who is above the age of 24. That gives a 7 to 8 year gap of sexual activity. We know that 16 and 17-year-olds are going to experiment. I do not go around and teach to the schools the age of consent is 16. Parents would not appreciate that if I did that. So we know that they're going to experiment, but we would like them to stick with someone who's closer in age. In a lot of these cases, they do believe they are engaging in a sexual relationship, an intimate partnership with someone who is close to their age and finds out that later down the road they had lied. I have one child right now who unfortunately contracted HIV. He is a male in Hattiesburg, and it was a male from out of state that came in from Atlanta. And while I can prosecute him for exposure for HIV, that is not a sex offense. It's not day for day, not a crime of violence. He won't have to register. And really, I should be able to go after him for unlawful sexual activity with a minor because he preyed on this child who was just coming of age, trying to explore, find himself, get into his first relationship. And it turns out it's with an older male that should not be near him. You should not have to sneak your girlfriend out of her house when you're in your 25, 30s, 40s, sneak your girlfriend out of her parents' house. You should also not have to go pick her up from her 10th grade biology class. So there's a problem here when we start looking at it. We're not looking, people say, oh, what if we're in a bar and they give a fake ID? That is not the scenarios we're seeing. And it's really disheartening when law enforcement and myself have to turn parents away and explain that the law doesn't protect, that there's a gap in the law. And then we look for positions of authority or trust. We do phone dumps. We try to find any examples of texting where they would ask to meet to engage in sexual activity, because that's a crime. Or if you pay $10, $15, $20, we could call it human trafficking, and they could get up to life. So this would really, in my opinion, close a gap in the law where we could call it for what it is, which is unlawful sexual activity with a minor. We also have leverage there and discretion as prosecutors to not always go for position of authority or trust, because it does make me sad sometimes that the schools and the police departments and other agencies get pulled into that as an element of the crime when really they had nothing to do with it. But yet in our indictment, you have Petal High School, Forest County Agricultural High School, Hattiesburg High School. It would be nice if we had this option to say, hey, this person's above 24. We could also choose this crime. It's a lesser penalty, up to 15 years, but we can leave the school out of it if we choose. Is that a good overview? I didn't.
Very good overview. Questions, comments? Senator Hill? No, we're not bringing this up for vote. This is purely discussion purposes, yeah. Senator Simmons.
I'm sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. And could you tell me again exactly what is wrong with the existing law that we can't actually prosecute?
Okay, so we have limited scenarios where someone, let's say, is 16 or 17, their parents find out they've engaged in a sexual relationship, and the person is usually in their 30s. We mirrored the Florida law in this instance, 24 or older, but usually it's 30s, 40s, 50-year-olds. I have had some females, some moms' friends who end up sleeping with their friends of their sons, and which is pretty disturbing. If they're under 16, we can go under sexual battery, where a 14 or 15-year-old cannot engage in sexual activity with someone who's at least got to have 36 months or older. It's a 36-month gap if they're 14 or 15. If they're under 14, it's got to be a 24-month gap. But then you get into that area right now. That is correct. 21 and above is 20 to life. Under 21 to 18 is 5 years. And then 13 to 17, the court has discretion to give 0 to life.
So right now, this is a person over the age of 20. Those are actually sex crimes. They have to register.
That is correct.
And so what we are proposing here is trying to give those individuals who have sex with with minors over the age of 16?
16 and older. Okay, age of 16 is the age of consent, except if the person's in a position of authority or trust. We're having a hard time establishing how they would be in that position of authority or trust when they're not even in our jurisdiction and they just come in and have sex with our minors.
And our current sexual battery statute does not capture those individuals that sex with.
That's correct. It's under 16. It's 14 and 15 is subsection C, and subsection D is under 14. And then you have sexual battery without consent, which is subsection A, but that is when the person did not consent. These individuals, these minors are consenting, but one, they're really not of age to be able to consent to a relationship like that. And it's pretty hard for parents to go against a man who comes in with money and a car and promises them all of these things. And these parents are trying to keep their kids, you know, under their rules, in their house, following school rules, and they're really running off sometimes with men in their 30s and 40s. And we have had some females too, so I don't want to just say men.
So we want to try to criminalize what parents, because the 16 or 17-year-old will have sex with
They are consenting, but if they sent a photo of themselves, that man could face up to 40 years prison, day for day, for child exploitation, and that's also a federal law, and we match that law. Also, if that person punched the child, choked the child, in any way confined the child, they could face kidnapping charges. They could face felony child abuse, which is punishable up to life. We deem a child under the age of 18 in all other areas except for sex. So the fact that you can text a child to have sex with you and you can go to prison, but when you actually have sex with them, you don't have to go to prison when they're 16 or 17. It doesn't make sense. So it's a gap in the law. It's 16 unless the person is in a position of authority or trust, but that's for actual penetration. I'm talking about human trafficking. If you pay, then it's up to life, and that child didn't consent. They're a victim of human trafficking. So, and then also if they text, yes, and that's under 18. It's not 16 or 17, under 18.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the question. Senator Wiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions. I think we've worked on some bill previously.
Yes, sir.
And before, I want the record to be clear, I'm against such activity. So anybody wants to start, wants to go play it back, when I start asking the questions, I'm against it. So first of all, so we already had, first of all, has this bill been approved by the Mississippi Prosecutors Association? Is this a bill of the MPA?
This is not my bill. I was asked to come speak as a subject matter expert, 16 years in sex crimes, so I can't speak to that, but I believe they are on board. I've been on a few emails where DA Hal Kittrell and other.
Okay, well, I talked to my DA and she doesn't know about it.
Okay,
Okay,
this
so
is not my bill though, just to show you know, I didn't write this bill. They asked me because I used to prosecute in Florida
Who is
under.
they?
This is my bill.
Oh.
This is my bill. I've asked
like
Ms.
the chairman.
Denham to come in
like the
and talk to us about it. Yeah.
We like
Sure.
the chairman. Okay, so then you were mentioning 30 years of age. If you look at section 1 in the bill that's written there, it says a person 24 years of age or older with a person 16 or 17. So if the person is 16 years old, that means we can prosecute somebody who's 18 years old, correct?
Prosecute someone who's 18 for having sex with a 16 or 17-year-old?
Yes, that's how the bill's written.
I think if the perpetrator is 24 or older.
No, oh, 24 years
Yes,
of age.
sir.
Okay, thank you.
There's a 7 or 8 year gap of sexual activity. It's almost like a pond. We don't want you to go fishing in the ocean, but we're going to give you a pond, and we'd like you to stay in that pond and understand that, hey, when you're 24 and older and you're going to schools and you're preying on children in schools, there's a problem
Okay,
there.
that helps me because, okay, so what we're saying is 24 years, if they're 24 years and the child is 16 years old, let's say, then that's a crime,
Yes, sir.
is what we're doing. Okay,
And that
Is
is a law that's been on the books for at least 20 plus years in Florida, and they just knew that I used to prosecute under that law, and when I moved here, we don't have it. And I've seen instances where I've had to turn people away, unfortunately.
okay. So but you've prosecuted using the current sexual battery statute.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Okay, so that's in section 4 of the bill, line 335. So under current sexual battery law that is used by prosecutors throughout this state, it states that one, it doesn't matter what the ages are. If there's no consent, that's a sexual battery.
Yes, under subsection A.
And then so it doesn't matter if they're 16 and one is 17, or if one is 37 and one is 16. It's sexual battery.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then the age restriction, starting at line 342, that's where you're talking about the age of consent is 16, and then you get into the age part of it. And so the gap you're talking about is really where there's, let's see, if their person is 17 and the other person is older but not in a position of trust.
That's right, authority or trust.
So let's understand that if you're 17 years old and the person who commits the crime against you is, let's say, 19, that's not a crime unless the person is in a position of trust.
And we have had some close in age. I'm far less concerned about the 22-year-old brand-new football assistant coach with a 17-year-old cheerleader, but that's a crime because he's in a position of authority or trust. I'm far less concerned about him than someone in their 30s, 40s, 50s with a 16 or 17-year-old
Right,
child.
okay. And so let's talk about that, because this does happen, whether people it does happen, is the 16-year-old is consensually engaging in sex with the 24-year-old at times. But that's what you're trying to eliminate. But the problem is, and this goes back to the parents, is the kid who is 16 years old has willingly consented to sex with that 24-year-old.
Which is the
Isn't that
same-
correct?
Yes, sir. It's also the same in a position of authority or trust. I've never seen a position of authority or a trust case that was forcible sexual intercourse or without consent. All of those minors do consent to engage in sexual activity with these adults in positions of authority or trust. All of them consent to take nude photos and videos of themselves and send child porn out. They're consenting, but don't we want to make that
Well, that's a decision we have to make, which goes to Senator Simmons' point is, at what point, I understand, because I've sat with parents who their 16-year-old child in grand jury had sex with an 18-year-old, and they wanted that person put in prison. And we had to tell them, sorry, but your child had consensual sex on their own accord with the 18-year-old. So the question goes to what Senator Simmons is saying. And let me back up. The consensual part of this, so unlike sexual battery, what you're saying is even if there's consent of a 17-year-old with a 24-year-old, you want to make that a crime. That's
think
what
Senator
that's what the
has
chairman wants.
presented that bill and asked me to come speak on it because I successfully prosecuted in Florida under that, and
Probably going to kill all my bills now. But I just want us to understand, because it is a serious issue that when we start taking people's freedom and making them a sex offender.
Yes.
And so we want to be, so we're saying on a consensual sex of a 17-year-old, if the person is 24 years old or older, then that person is going to prison as a sex offender.
they're still a minor under the law, and I think that is.
Well, no, a 17-year-old is not a minor. A 16-year-old is the age of consent in Mississippi.
Except if the person's
In the position of
authority or
trust.
or if it's felony child abuse, or if it's child exploitation, or if it's human trafficking, there's
And the
all.
reason for the position of trust is because, so for those that may not know, the position of trust is a teacher, a coach, a preacher, somebody like that. That's why we said, because they've preyed on the trust that they've developed with that person. Okay, so the consent part of as a 16-year-old, that is the age of consent in Mississippi.
Yes, under certain circumstances,
All right.
yes, sir.
So, and are you saying that the current sexual battery statute, y'all aren't able to capture these people?
I've been creative and tried to find positions of trust where I knew authority wasn't there. I love that the legislature says authority or trust. So obviously you delineate between the two, and I've gotten creative and tried to say that they trusted this person as their first intimate partner, and that person lied to them and preyed on them or groomed them used money and things to lure them, because we see that. We see people being taken on shopping trips, sneaking out of the house, and these are things that older individuals are doing that are really grooming activities with young minors who are in school.
The last question. So are you saying on a 17-year-old who consensually has sex, then we are not, then that's decision-making authority. They are a minor in Mississippi. In 1 year, they could go in the military. We want that person, we're saying they can't think for themselves at that point, or their parents have not been able to handle them, and so we want the state to put this person in jail.
I think the way the law is written is there's a possibility also for probation. The position of authority or trust is up to 30 years prison. This, I believe they wrote up to 15 years prison. And I think it's the fact that that child is still developing. They're still considered a minor in all aspects of the law unless they're emancipated, serving in the military, or married. And so I think it's just trying to have clarity and uniformity in the law, because 16-year-olds, there's so many things they're limited that they can't do. And I know you keep giving examples of a 17-year-old and 18-year-old, but really this is 16 and 17 with 24 or older. And even if you would feel better of something 30 or older, I think we all would agree it's pretty disturbing anyone in their 30s or 40s having sex with 16 and 17-year-old kids and sitting outside of schools and picking them up to ditch class. These are the things that we're seeing and that we're dealing with, and the parents believe it's a crime, so they come to law enforcement, and law enforcement says, whoa, is this the position of authority or trust? It's not. So then we're looking at, well, did they send any videos, take any photos of themselves? We're trying to get creative and go under child exploitation, which would be a 40-year crime day for day, instead of doing what would be in Florida, unlawful sexual activity with a minor, which is 15 years.
Yeah, and I want that distinction to be clear, Mr. Chair. I think it is important that it's 24 years or older. You keep saying 30, the way this is written is 24 years. But that gap has occurred under the sexual, I say a gap, where you have an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old or whatever. But you're saying, I think what you're saying is we want to put an age limit where it's kind of creepy.
Yeah, it is.
It's creepy that a 30-year-old is going after a 16-year-old.
Well, and I think y'all just have to ask yourselves, does it make sense that if a 17-year-old texts nude videos of themselves, that's child porn, but that 17-year-old can engage in a sexual relationship with someone who's 24 or older, and that's not a crime? But texting videos or photos of themselves is. Ask yourself that. The mere text can get you 40 years. Even a 30 or 24 or older asking that 17-year-old to meet them at the public library to engage in sexual activity, that would be soliciting a minor under the age of 18.
But just, this is what we do as lawyers. So let's say this person is 17, okay, they're consensual. The parents are completely fine with it, okay, and the person's 25 years old. If this law goes into effect, the district attorney can still go prosecute that, correct? Now, the question is whether your discretion you do that, but legally speaking, you can still go prosecute that.
We only prosecute cases that law enforcement agencies turn into us to
I
prosecute, so.
Our wonderful Senator Hobb Bryan, when you say prosecutorial discretion, go ask Senator Bryan what he thinks about prosecutorial discretion. So, we also had a DA up in north central Mississippi who had prosecutorial discretion, and the state is paying millions of dollars because it's gone to the Supreme Court because he couldn't get a conviction. So those are factors that we have to look at. I know you may not, but the question is, will other DAs do that?
I'm just a lowly ADA, so I can't speak on that. I'm not paid enough for those decisions. But I do appreciate y'all having me here today as someone who's had the benefit of prosecuting in 3 states, Alabama, Florida, and Mississippi. It does make me sad that there are a few areas in our law that don't match. The clarity, the confusion is there. I actually did an interlocutory appeal on this very issue where a defense attorney to the Supreme Court said it's not fair that Ms. Denham has indicted this individual who is 38, texting a 17-year-old minor to engage in sexual activity out in the driveway, a blowjob. I indicted him because the police department arrested him. They did an interlocutory appeal and said, whoa, if the minor had gone out there and engaged in this activity, it wouldn't have been a crime. But because the 38-year-old man texted the minor and asked him to meet with him, that she can now go forward on child exploitation. And that interlocutory appeal we won. And that man is now a registered sex offender, as he should be, because he pulled up outside of a child's home on a Wednesday night when he was studying for a science test and was texting him things he would give him and entice him if he would just come outside and get in the car with him. And that's the very behavior of our citizens enforced in Perry County and Lamar. This is a Lamar County bill, but that we're trying to help our constituents. And I don't take it lightly because I asked permission to speak on these stories on the way up here, because there's real families hurting from them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good questions. Thanks. Senator Sparks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do understand the oddity in the law that you have described, and that text messages and photographs or videos of things that the act itself is legal is very confusing and seems silly. But that's not actually what this bill does. This bill takes it in a different direction. We could also say that we could take the age of consent back to 16 for those same purposes. So I get your point. My concern is you're talking a lot about deception. You mentioned deception multiple times early on. Is deception any element in the crime that would be criminalized here?
No.
Okay.
This, I believe they picked from Florida, and other surrounding states also have this law. It's strict liability.
All right. And I think that's part of what maybe Senator Wiggins was talking about, is that I want to make sure we talk about what's in the bill, not how we feel or about what has happened in other situations where someone was deceptive. Now, you did mention a bar issue, and that's one concern I have. You have a college town near a larger city. You don't know who's in that bar. Now, usually 30-year-olds are probably not walking around in the bar in the college town, but a 24-year-old is, 25-year-old is. They're law students, they're graduate students. So I just, and I know it's not your bill, so I'm kind of, I guess, offering this as a concern, is that if that minor has used a fake ID to get into that bar, and then in fact there's some relationship, strict liability says, I'm sorry, you were in a bar where someone should not have been 17, but unfortunately for you, the law in Mississippi now is this is a strict liability crime. And I can assure you their parents are not going to be happy probably with the minor who was in the bar, but they're going to be less happy with the person whom they had relationships with. So that's kind of my concern, is that area.
And I can only speak to my 16 years of doing this. I've never had that scenario. I've never once had a case presented to me where the victim lied about her age and they were in a bar and they used a fake ID and the person engaged in sexual activity with them. Of course, that would be under the age of 16 that we'd have that scenario right now, because this is legal, 16 and 17-year-old, unless they're a position of authority or trust. I do know that some statutes build in an affirmative defense that if the child lies about their age, I think maybe our human trafficking also might do that with a minor. If there's certain laws that will say if the person put themselves out as an adult, an 18 or older, but they ended up being 17. I've personally prosecuted a woman for human trafficking who was 19 with a 17-year-old and going around the state, and she was helping sell a 17-year-old, but that's human trafficking. Others would say that's consensual because she's 17 and she consented. So my concern with this is that if you pay $5, it's human trafficking. If you send a text, it's a 40-year felony. If you call it child abuse, it's up to life. But if you say it's just engaging in sexual activity consensually and they're not in a position of authority or trust, it's no crime. And again, I'm far less concerned about a 22-year-old football coach with a 17-year-old cheerleader. But right now, in our laws in the state of Mississippi, that individual can get 30 years, and we've all agreed to that.
Right, but none of that is this bill, with all due respect, because this bill criminalizes activity between people who are not in position of trust or authority, and it's consensual. But if it's deceptive, is it consensual? I mean, if I'm deceiving you, would you have consented but for the deception, and that deception go on both sides? I just want us to think about that as we go through the process. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep, thanks, good question. Senator Hill?
If we're talking about online exploitation of a minor to, gain the opportunity to have sex with that minor, maybe we need to look at specifying the crime to online sexual exploitation of a minor through some type of false pretense. Because if that's what we're targeting, and we're targeting 40-year-olds that are trying to have sex with 16-year-olds, then maybe we need to tailor that bill to that online exploitation, rather than just saying if a 24-year-old and a 17-year-old in college have a relationship, that man's now a sex offender. I have serious questions about that.
All right. Senator Hickman, I think. Had a question.
Yes, just a couple of questions. So one thing, do you have any stats across the state? Like, how many of these cases have come to prosecutor's office and they're having to say that they cannot prosecute because of XYZ, like cases that would specifically fit into this fact scenario?
No, sir. I can only speak just on the few instances where it reached my desk because the families weren't happy with law enforcement's response. Most of our trained officers throughout the state are going to stop it there when the first initial report comes in, because they know it's not a crime. So it will never reach the DA's office because a case file won't be presented because it's not deemed a crime. The only time I get involved is sometimes when the media asks about it, or when the parents contact us because they're unhappy with law enforcement's response.
And do you know if anyone has kind of polled the prosecutors to see how big of an issue this is across the state? Or, maybe it's an anomaly, maybe only your office is seeing this issue. Has that something that's been done?
I did prosecute under this law in Florida, so I don't think it's an anomaly just to Forest and Perry counties. I think it happens everywhere. It's just states get to choose what they want to criminalize and what they don't. And if Mississippi wants to allow 40, 50-year-olds with 16, 17-year-olds, then Mississippi can continue to do that. But I can't speak on behalf of everyone. I was just invited because I have a unique perspective that they chose to mirror a Florida law, and I came from Florida as a previous prosecutor under this law. So I think that gives a sense of comfort knowing that it survived scrutiny and that it's been upheld and challenged and has been longstanding a good law in the state of Florida and surrounding states.
And so I guess basically the answer is no.
No, I can't speak for everyone. I don't have the stats for other areas.
Now, one of the things you mentioned is our child pornography law or whatever. Like if someone sends a picture, it's one thing, if it's another. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't do a whole lot of criminal work, but if a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old sends out nude pictures of one another, they can be convicted under our child pornography statute as well, correct?
Would not be. Those would be considered delinquents. It's not a crime punishable up to life, and they didn't use a firearm in the commission of the crime, so they would go to youth court. They would not be convicted.
Well, correct. But they would absolutely, there is some kind of, they would be charged in the youth court system or what have you through this process.
Would do that. I usually go and counsel and speak to schools and explain that to them, but when they do sometimes share child pornography with each other, both children, the receiver and the sender, I have never seen cases submitted to youth court in our area of child exploitation would be the crime as a delinquent.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is, so let's just say a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I'll just expose what I'm trying to say is that you're looking at and you're saying that we have inadequacies in our laws, but there are other catches all between this, that whereas this wouldn't convict a 19-year-old, but if a 19-year-old exchanging pictures with a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old or whatever under our laws, they could also be convicted on those same laws. And I think you give numbers like 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds, but this is the same situation.
Base 5 to 40, a minimum of 5 up to 40 years and up to, I think, a minimum of a $50,000 fine. And that is considered child exploitation. That matches the federal law and the state of Mississippi law.
And so my final couple of questions is, I think maybe it was somebody asked a question about parental consent. So could a parent consent to this relationship? And I can't remember your answer. I think it was no, but a parent, could they consent to this type of relationship? Let's just say between a 17-year-old and a 24-year-old.
They could conceivably, if the person was emancipated, married, or serving in the military, certain laws build in that. So if they deemed them to have consent, much like I think if you have parental consent, you can still get married.
And so that's my point. My point is that under this, there's no, there's no safeguard where a parent may, not necessarily believe in marriage and say, but I consent to my child having a relationship with this person, but they can't. I mean, technically they could still be prosecuted. A neighbor could turn them into the police or whoever could turn them in. But a parent on the flip side could say my 15-year-old can get married to this person. And now this is okay.
Not a 15-year-old. No, we don't allow that.
Well, a 16-year-old.
16. Anything under 16 is definitely criminal. 15 has to be 36 months or more age gap. So we're not going to go after a 15-year-old with a 17-year-old because there's not a 36-month age gap, right? But we absolutely, all jurisdictions have prosecuted 18, 19, 20-year-olds with 15 and 14-year-olds. Every jurisdiction has done that.
And so my final question is, and this is to Senator Sparks' point, and I think you gave kind of a roundabout answer, but in the fact scenario that he gave, I could see myself fitted in that same fact scenario. I took 3 years off in undergrad, so I was absolutely a college student at the age of 24. And so if I'm in a bar with a 17-year-old who arguably should not have been there, and for whatever exchange happened and we go home, if that person or anybody who sees it, turns it in or whatever, I would be registering, if convicted, I'd be registering and be in jail for a period of time. Is that correct? Under this statute?
If the law enforcement agency chose to arrest on those weak facts, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good question. Senator, and I would point out lines 31 through 33 does, I think, speak to part of your question about this section does not apply to a person 16 or 17 years of age who has had the disability of minority removed. So there is that provision that's been asked a couple of times. I was going to point that out. All right, Senator England.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Denham, I don't want to belabor this any further, but I think that's what the B in Jud B stands for. I know you've been here already, but and look, I certainly want to help our prosecutors put bad guys away and bad people away. But my question here, and when you mentioned, hearing some of these questions, and in your 16 years of doing this job, you haven't seen certain circumstances arise. But I know that one thing that we're dealing with in Mississippi right now is that we have a lot of high school students finishing school early, and they're going to college and they're going into the workforce where they can, and they're 17. And my concern is that you have coworkers and you have college students like Senator Hickman mentioned that are maybe in a class with some of these people, and look, that's a college freshman, or that's a coworker on the line at one of our industries. If they have a consensual sexual relationship while that person is 17 and the individual is 24 or older, and that goes south, so to speak, and then that minor comes forward and says, hey, look, this gentleman and I had sex, and he's over 24 years old, he needs to be prosecuted. Under this law, would that person, number one, could that person be prosecuted? And number two, if they were prosecuted and found guilty of having a consensual sexual relationship with either a college student or a coworker at work, would they have to register as a sex offender? So I guess that's my two questions, because that's my concern, are the unintended consequences this bill may have, while we're certainly wanting to help you catch people that are doing things that are wrong.
way the bill's written, they could be prosecuted and they would have to register as a sex offender. And again, I can only speak to the scenarios I've seen, and I've never seen, coworkers or anyone who's doing dual credit at a university or, these are not the scenarios we're seeing. That's all I can say, but that doesn't mean that those possible scenarios don't exist. I do think that 24, I understand why they chose it, because they were choosing a state that already had longstanding law. But again, most of the scenarios that I'm seeing and have seen are 30 or older. And I still would be very troubled by a 17-year-old, even in a college setting, having sex with someone 30 or older.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. And I agree with you. I just worry that, you know, this is something brand new in our state, is this deal. And I know Senator Sparks is probably going to deal with this in his committee, Economic Workforce Development, where we had this loophole where we have college students. I mean, we have high school students graduating and wanting and needing to go to work because they're high school graduates, are wanting and needing to go to college. But, and our employers are trying to look at ways, because right now, if they're under 18, you know, they might not be able to enter the workforce. But we've got to figure something out to do with these students who are ready to start their career and move on with their lives. And this is brand new. And that's, I know it's not a scenario you've seen, because quite frankly, we're working on it on multiple different levels to try to figure out how to, you know, we're trying to protect people here, but in the other situation, we're trying to help them get to work and get out and be productive members of society and go to college and things like that. So I want to work with you on this and see if maybe there's something we can do that would help you do your job at the same time as we're not potentially sweeping in people that, you know, end up in a relationship that goes south and then find themselves on the sex offender registry because of it. But that's just my concern on this. But thank you, Ms. Denham. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking at lines 24 through 30, are there similar language that would apply to males? In terms of using the descriptions, all the description basically refer to, and you know, you have some female predators as well now.
Yes, sir. On the next page, I believe, you'll see genital penetration, oral, anal, or female genital penetration, union with sexual organ of another. So that includes male as well, so of another. And these are they took I think, I didn't write this obviously, but they took definitions from our existing laws. So these definitions of sexual activity, I believe, are already on the books. So statutory rape will have sexual intercourse, sexual battery has sexual penetration, but both of them include definitions that include a whole gamut of sexual activity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Had a follow-up.
Yeah, I just wanted to just clear one small point. I thought so, and I just had to look up the law. In Mississippi, a female can't get married at the age 15.
That was parental consent?
Yes.
I thought it was 16.
Nope, 15.
All right. These are all great questions. Others for anybody? This is certainly the murder's row, as you have. as you have
A very,
discovered.
very fun Tuesday morning coming off of a holiday, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Happy President's Day to you. No, these.
Want me breakfast first? Yep.
No, Ms. Denham, I do appreciate you coming very much, and don't take these tough questions as being opposed to these. I've worked with these ladies and gentlemen long enough to know that they are all very well intentioned. They want to do what's absolutely the best for public safety in Mississippi. They just want to iron out all the kinks and get through all of the problems so that I don't get embarrassed on the floor of the Senate if it gets that far. So. With your expertise and experience, it's been invaluable this morning to enlighten us as to how we might think about trying to protect these types of situations from happening in Mississippi. So I very much appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be here today. And you handled the questions exceptionally well. So with that being said, we're going to see if there are any other follow-ups, anybody? If not, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Feel free to hang around and chat with any of the members one-on-one. They may have some follow-up questions they would prefer to ask in private. And then with that, I will recognize the motion to rise and report. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.